Thank you very much for joining our panel today. Also, thank you very much to our friends at the Berkeley Global Society for organizing this great event. My name is Rafael Gaspar, and I'm very glad to have such a lineup of fantastic panelists with me today to discuss a very important topic, the green and social bonds industry in Brazil, its challenges and potential. First, let me introduce myself. I'm a senior associate at the Brazilian firm Pinheiro Neto Advogados, working mainly with structured finance and specializing in the agribusiness securitization. Throughout my entire life, I have seen agribusiness, environment, and social development being treated as mortal enemies. However, many times I asked myself, does it have to be like that? Is that even true? In my personal life and professional experience, I have learned how these areas are actually highly connected and different from what is seen as common knowledge many times. They can live in great harmony and foster one another. That's where the idea to this panel came from. And to further discuss this topic, we have invited very distinguished guests to join our webinar today. First, we have Leisa Souza. Leisa is responsible for coordinating CBI's, the Climate Bonds Initiative, agriculture program, and supporting broader efforts to develop green finance in Brazil. She joined CBI after working as a consultant for the Carbon Trust and the IDB on climate change and energy issues, and for the British Embassy in Brazil as an energy policy officer for more than 6 years. We also have Marta de Sá. Marta is a director of structured operations at Vert Securitizadora, a securitization company in Brazil, and leads the activities of origination and structuring of business, as well as activities of issuing papers and their subsequent distribution in the capital markets. Another guest today is Milton Mentem. Milton is CEO of Eco Securitizadora, an agribusiness securitization company in Brazil. He's a member of the GFI, the Green Finance Group of Brazil, and also a member of the Green Finance for Agriculture Subcommittee. At last but not least, we have Patrick Jackson. Patrick is a counsel at Clifford Chance's São Paulo office, and his principal expertise is in capital markets, liability management, and restructuring transactions, and US regulatory matters, particularly those involving large Brazilian issuers. Having made these introductions, I'm gonna start with some questions, just to give you guys watching an idea. What we plan here is to have two segments. One, talking a little bit about what is the world right now for green bonds, social bonds. And then in a second moment, we're gonna try to look to the future and think about what are the challenges, what are the potentials. So if you guys don't mind, my first question would be to you, Leisa. Can you please introduce to this group what are green bonds and what is CBI's role in the green bonds industry?
Thank you for the question, Rafael. It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you to talk about this such important topic, an increasing topic, which is the green bond market. So just to give an introduction, so what are green bonds? So green bonds are used to finance or refinance in 100%, so eligible projects. And if we look at, different structures, either debt or loans, we're talking about, putting a label on that, which clearly indicates to investors, where the resources are going towards and that they're going towards 100% in terms of, financing eligible projects. This is a market that began back in 2007 with the first issuances from the European Investment Bank together with the World Bank. And since then it's grown exponentially. So cumulatively to date, we have 840 billion US dollars issued in green bonds. So this market is growing year by year. In 2019, globally, we issued $258 billion of green bonds. So this just shows the evolution of this market and how it's growing. And of course, we see exponential growth starting in 2015, of course, with the Paris Agreement and the commitments, but also, this agenda in terms of climate beginning. And although, it's Climate Bonds Initiative, we're looking at this shift towards a low carbon economy. So in terms of CBI's role and how how it all began, today we're celebrating a 10th year anniversary since the Climate Bonds initiative began, and we began with this mission of looking at the global bond market. So it's a 100 trillion market, and how this can be shifted towards investing in climate aligned assets and projects. So this is how our mission began. And one of the first things that the climate bonds did, we saw this gap in the market in terms of, so we have, the regular structures, but to provide guidance to issuers and to provide guidance to investors on where you should invest or what are the type of, projects that should be put forward, we created a taxonomy, which is a classification of the different projects and assets in areas that need investment so we can keep within the 2-degree in terms of global warming. And we also, with the taxonomy, developed sector criteria. And this is for different sectors of the economy, where we set specific metrics and thresholds on different areas. And the latest one, and I think the most exciting one for me, is the recently published an agriculture criteria. And we have here our partner Aquagros, who was the first securitization company who certified a bond with the agricultural criteria. It came from Brazil, so this speaks a lot in terms of how we see the potential of this market going. So this is a bit of CBI's work. Of course, we have a part of market intelligence, market outreach, so to actually create this green bond market. In terms of Brazil, so the market began back in 2015. The first issuance was with BRF, so food industry, and since then we've also seen this market grow from almost 500 million euros to more than $7 billion issued to date. And if we look at the different sectors that are funded, energy, just as following the global trend, that's the most funded sector in terms of use of proceeds, and land use, and I think this is really important to kind of highlight, receives 35%. Of course, this goes a lot to pulp and paper industry, but we're also seeing other issuances come to market. So we were really excited to see Aquagros be the first, with Rizoma Agro, the first issuer using the agricultural criteria, because I think this speaks to the potential. So of course, this is the market to date, but of course there's a lot of potential, especially if you consider the volume in terms of the potential that agriculture needs. We recently published a report where we mapped 162 billion in terms of opportunity up to 2030, and that's just looking at what Brazil is already doing sustainably. So if we consider the investment needs of the sector year by year, we know that that amount is even bigger. So why did we publish this study? To kind of show what Brazil and recognize what Brazil already does in terms of sustainable agriculture. And I think, Rafael, you I think went straight to the point in saying, like, we need to really highlight agriculture and environment. And I think Green Bond kind of gives that also highlight in terms of what is, and recognizes what is being done sustainably and what can be done in scale. So I think that's a brief introduction. So CBI is mainly on the Green Bond. But just to kind of give a note to, I know that Martha will talk about social bonds. We also recently published a report in October where we look at just sustainable debt capital market, because when we're talking about sustainable debt capital markets, we're looking at social, we're looking at sustainable, we're looking at transition, we're looking at green. And we've seen an increase of all of these other labels that also come. And I think it's also important because they'll signal to investors where the resources are going towards. So if we're talking about social, of course, this is the social benefits that bring. And in our report to date, we have 75 billion in terms of social bond being issued globally. So I think that also indicates that, these other labels are increasing and they are very important as well, and specifically social when we talk about agriculture. So that's all for me. Rafael, back to you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And on that, I'll pass the ball to Milton here. As you mentioned, the Rizoma and the issuance of green bonds in Brazil. Milton, let us know a little about your experience with the issuances and the role of CBI, how that was, and what are your feelings about it?
Okay, well, good morning for all the participants. Thanks BGS and Rafael for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Well, we can share the experience that we have, telling a little bit the history of how Aquagro has started working with the green bonds and the evolution. A little bit, the history will tell exactly the situation, how this evolved. Um, we first have to highlight what we do. So we are working hard to develop the market of green CRAs, CRAs. And first of all, what is the CRA? CRA stands for Agribusiness Receivables Certificates, and basically it's a fixed income security backed by agri receivable. Today in Brazil, we have a total of 65 billion reais of CRAs in the market. And just this year, in the middle of the pandemic, we are going to end the year with approximately 15 billion reais of issuances. So it's a growing and a huge vehicle for the agribusiness as far as securitization. In 2016, we issued the first green CRA in Brazil. It was a 1 billion reais CRA for Suzano Paper and Pulp Company. And at that time, we thought this market, the green bond in the agri in Brazil, would grow fast because we know the huge potential of the agribusiness in Brazil as far as origination. So we have lots of important segments in the agribusiness that could benefit of the green initiative. But this was not the reality, has not proven to be, and was very different. One of the biggest challenges that we faced since 2016 was what could be labeled as green or not. And this had to be a lot of with the lack of a taxonomy or standards that could define these criteria, the green criteria. Of course, this has to be with the fear of greenwashing and the credibility of the green bonds as itself. This challenge was solved with the help of organizations like CBI that worked hard on the taxonomies, given several standards for different classes of green assets. So what we have is sorry. Then in 2019, CBI released the bioenergy taxonomy, and we immediately decided to structure the first green CRA labeled for biofuel. We put together this CRA for Usina Colorado, one of the biggest sugarcane producer of ethanol in Brazil. And the issuance was not was canceled actually because of lack of demand, and we felt very frustrated at that time with the little investors' interest in green finance back in last year actually. This year, 2020, CBI released this agricultural taxonomy. And we decided to, again, structure the first green CRA using the brand new taxonomy. We issued the Rizoma CRA that Leisa just mentioned. Well, Rizoma is the biggest regenerative and organic producer of corn and soybean in Brazil. And this CRA was placed last September. And we finally had a very good surprise. Investors' demand was very high, and a brand new base of investors seeking for ESG bonds. This Rizoma case actually brings Rafael a very good hope because then we can see traction for the first time from the investor side. And this is what we can tell over this the whole story. We think the future for the challenges are being overcome, and the future is very positive for green CRAs and green bonds agri in Brazil. That's it, Rafael.
Thanks. Thank you, Milton. It's good to see that we are improving, right? Not going back in time, which is very important. I think on what you mentioned, Milton, you mentioned the general demand for ESG, right? And here, Marta, I'll ask you to tell us a little bit also, because I understand that Verti is involved not only in green cross, but also deeply involved in social bonds also. So you're seeing a lot of the two sides. What can you tell us? What's your feeling about the discussions about these different structures?
Thank you, everyone. Hello. It's a pleasure being here today. I'll say that we have evolved a lot. So in the early 2010s, we've been starting issuing CRAs in Brazil. It was very challenging because investors didn't know exactly how it worked and how the agri sector was, the risk cycle, and it was a lot of investor education. And I think almost 10 years later, we are facing the same with ESG investing. So when we see Europe and the US, we see many new funds being launched that are targeted to ESG investment, and even loans and banks with their own ESG ratings and policies. And we've seen this evolving really fast in Brazil. I think the pandemic positively contributed to this, as hard as it might be, but we've seen the agri sector being more digital, and the fintechs also achieving people that were not in the financial market, and SMEs the same. So we are in a new wave regarding ESG in Brazil. I would say with both green and social. So Rizoma was really important because it was the first time that a grower was labeled as green. And I think the next step that we have to the challenge in Brazil is to do this to many small and medium growers. So how can we measure their positive impact, because they do have. And on the social side, we see that the agri sector is a target, certainly, but also what we've been doing in these last months, we've just issued a social bond for SMEs. So they were benefit, and we think that there's no turning point. So we have this as a new feature, but I think that already in the equity side, we see many investors that they need to be ESG oriented, otherwise they don't even put an order on the IPO. We are not that far on the debt side, but I think we're going through, and we need to do this investor education. We are working in another social bond regarding students financing, and we have done a FIDIC that was very social with Sebrae, and it's targeted to SMEs and growers. So we think that we need to do this more and more. And in the social is a little bit different because we don't have the equivalent to CBI. So what we do have is the social bond principles, and the label is mainly based on those principles. And we still need to understand different scenarios, because SMEs is different from growers and is different from students and for private loans. So I think the market is getting mature, and we all need to be aware of the different moves that are happening all the time. And Brazil has a big potential, both on the green and the social side. So sometimes when we speak up with the companies, they don't even know they are having a positive social impact. And then we start asking, and I think if we would tell the companies that they are having a positive impact, they'll start measuring it, and everyone will benefit from, because Brazil has this characteristic, both on the agri and the social. We have done many things, and we just don't measure and don't tell anyone. So I think we are quite far from the greenwashing. Of course, we need to be aware of it, but we need to start telling what we do. And I think we are on the right track.
Thank you, Marta. I think what you mentioned in the end is very important, right? Sometimes it's a lack of education, not only of other people, but of the companies, of the people that are doing that positive impact. And I think it's the same for social and for green, right? We have these very strict laws, and sometimes green in Brazil is saying, oh, Brazil is terrible. But no, if you look at reality, of course, we can improve, and hopefully we will, but there is so much good things being done. But one thing that popped up that you and Milton mentioned in different ways, but I think that's abroad, I think investors are more used to green, to social, but still there is some education going on, right? And we need to do that. But on that, I'd love to hear Patrick, because you work with the Brazilian issuers, but discussing with international players, international investors. What have you seen on that, Patrick? What structures you have seen to enable these Brazilian issuers to reach out to these international investors and try to find people that maybe are more educated now than investors in Brazil?
Hi, that's right. So on the international side, the market is very mature, right? It's very developed. And our firm in particular is considered an international firm, meaning we've got offices, several offices around the world, and our first offices came out of Europe, and Europe is the most mature market, I would say, in terms of green issuances. And so, as with many things in the financial markets, I think the international markets are a great model, are a great goal, are a great pattern for Brazil to kind of compare itself to and to look forward to. I will say that price differentials for companies that are in the market for green bonds, even on the international side, are still developing. So I think there needs to be more incentive for not just Brazilian companies, but companies globally to issue these green bonds. However, the market abroad is certainly very advanced in that regard, and there are many more funds that invest in these securities, and there are many more companies that issue these securities and do see a price benefit. In terms of Brazilian companies that have gone into the international markets with these green securities, internationally issued green securities, and let me make that distinction. So what we've been talking about so far are CRAs, which are securities issued here in the local market in Brazil. What we would work on as an international firm, and what we've seen, are securities issued by Brazilian companies, but to investors outside of Brazil. And that's not to say that foreign investors cannot invest in CRAs here in Brazil. They certainly do. But these securities that are done internationally are not sold to Brazilian investors. They're sold overseas. There are several examples. We work a lot with Klabin, who has done a few of these. BNDES has also done some. And that market is even more developing, I should say. The financial incentive is frankly, it's not quite there yet. But what these companies are doing is expanding their investor base so that when pricing does improve, they've already got a relationship with the investors that are interested in these types of securities. So you got to start somewhere. Like I said, Klabin is a great starting point. Again, when Brazilian companies are ready for the international markets, this is a great place to look, if not for immediate financial incentive, for building your investor base. And that's what I would encourage here in Brazil is our Brazilian companies to always continually think beyond Brazilian investors and think about foreign investors. And when you think about foreign investors, there is a very, very developed market for investors that are interested in sustainable and sustainability and securities that are issued with those kinds of features. I assume we'll talk in a little bit about future issuances and what we see in the future. And there I would say that there's a great market of sustainability linked bonds, which are slightly different than green bonds. There you do get a direct financial incentive for satisfying certain sustainability metrics. And we could talk about what those are, but that's a different product from a CRA that is a green CRA, and that's a different product from a green bond because it's got built into it literally a financial incentive for satisfying what we call KPIs. So, and there's only been about 4 of them or 5 now issued in the international markets. And a Brazilian company was one of the only ones, Suzano, who issued and then tapped again later on this year a sustainability linked bond. Brazil, in a number of cases, actually, in international debt issuances, has been very innovative. And Suzano is one great example there, but I assume we'll talk about the future in a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patrick. Yes, let's now start planning the future here. And but again, listening to you once more, it seems like sometimes we are complaining and trying to look abroad, not meaning international, but where the problem is somewhere else. And you're saying, well, Brazilian issuers need to start tapping and start learning. And you said, well, at least seems like we're taking some baby steps, at least, but moving towards that. And I don't know, Lisa, what is your view? What is the trend for next years? And Patrick mentioned that we're getting innovative with Brazilian issuers. What do you see as the trends for bonds in the upcoming years?
So I think in terms of trends, what we're seeing, of course, in the international market, and I think this reflects here as well, is one, sustainability linked. So that is definitely a trend that we are seeing growing. And another trend, I think, is transition bonds. So it's ICMA just launched their guidelines yesterday. The Climate Bonds Initiative, we had done a framework where we launched in September. So I think this is also going to be one of the major things that we're seeing and moving towards. And I think in Brazil, sustainable bonds as well, because sustainable, we bring both green and social together. So especially in agriculture, I think, that there is going to be kind of this expansion in terms of also sustainable bonds as a whole. So I think we'll see, of course, green bonds continue to expand. It's the most consolidated market, but of course, these other labels, which are so important, coming in. And I think, it speaks to what Patrick said in terms of course, increasing your investor base. And these different labels expand this even more because, you're not only looking for investors that are looking for a green label, but also investors that are looking at a wide variety of labels. And I think this is important for Brazil in terms of all that we can do. So just to kind of go, I think, into the transition, Patrick already mentioned sustainability linked with transition bonds, of course, when the market started. So if we look at social, if we look at sustainable, and if we look at green, we're talking about use of proceeds. So these are use of proceeds bonds. When you're talking about sustainability linked, you're talking about KPIs, and transitions is kind of like the sustainability link because you'll put different in terms of the targets. So you'll set different targets in terms of your business model. So I think, this is very innovative because you're not only looking to the use of proceeds, but you're looking at how you're going to make this transition in terms of the business model from a company. So I think that's going to be also one of the big trends, and the Climate Bonds Initiative is going to start working a bit more on setting clearer metrics and guidelines for transitions over the next 2 years.
Thank you very much, Leisa. And looking at this view, Milton, you had some good and some bad experience in the past, and what do you think will be the challenges to reach these goals that Leisa just mentioned? What do you see as the main problems we need to tackle now to make sure everything we're planning here will indeed be implemented?
Well, first of all, we have to realize that the potential for the green assets in Brazil is very high. Recently, the Ministry of Agri and CBI has just released a study, a roadmap that tells us that by 2030, we may reach a potential of $160 billion of green assets in the agri Brazil. So it's huge. So we should not expect big challenges of originating the structures or the operations. The borrowers are there, and the segments and the opportunities are there. By the other hand, companies that adopt the ESG practices are should be seen as lower risks. That's our opinion, because they have a much better model and plans for resilient and they react faster. So we should be seeing the investors looking for green bonds for a similar and comparable type of bond. They should see and look to the green bond as lower risk and more attractive than the traditional bond for a similar asset class. There is another point, Rafael. The pandemic somehow has had an effect of integrating the ESG risks in the investors' criteria. Somehow helped to show that these ESG factors that usually would not be seen as lower risks, they proved to be effective during this international crisis. So this is another point that should help the unlock this segment, this market. Okay. Another point that for Brazil is important to point out is, as Patrick said, this green bond market outside Brazil is much more mature. In Brazil is evolving, but is still in the early stages. Outside Brazil, this is much bigger, and the traction is there. Recently, the government has approved a law that will allow us to issue CRAs in foreign currency, assessing the international investors, which until today we could not access. This opens another great opportunity of assessing a different base of investors outside Brazil, much bigger than the Brazilian capital market. Taking all these points into consideration, we expect a huge traction during the next few years. We don't see this not happening at all, either in Brazil, but also in Brazil, but in outside Brazil with the international investors. Just to give a flavor, currently we have 3 green CRAs in our operational pipeline. We are structuring 3 different CRAs, 2 of them in the biofuel taxonomy and 1 on the agri taxonomy. So we end the year with another 3 CRAs in the pipeline, And we know that many others are being structured in the market. So this just proves the idea that we can expect this growing, because of both sides now understood the benefits of having this this green label, and be associated with the ESG practices, and showing the best practices of each of these segments. So that's our hope. We expect a huge growth for next year's, Rafael.
Good, thank you, Milton. And just building on what you said, and Liz also mentioned, it seems like we are getting more structures, we are getting more alternatives. Patrick mentioned that we are starting to tap the international investor market, but it's still something growing. And here I'd love to hear from Marta. What else do we need to do to really make this market explode? What do you think, investors? Because we have the structure, we have the issuers. Seems like there's still some learning to do internally, but we are starting to move. What do you think we need to do, Marta, to get those guys with the funds and bring them to Brazilian issuers on the green and social bonds market?
Yeah, I was in New York in January this year, and what I've learned is that to go to Brazil, they are more keen looking at corporate structures. So it's something that they are more used to. They can see Klabin's balance sheet. It's a big company. They know what to look at, and they're not that familiar with portfolios and structured deals as we have in our local securitization market. So I think it's a step by step. And when, on the other hand, they have large tickets. So usually they need to invest at least, let's say, $10 million in an issuance. And with our great currency, we have now more than 50 million reais, which is kind of a restriction for some names or some deals. So I think that if we have bigger structures and investors learning more about the structure market and diversified portfolios, will get spread and will impact more. So when you lend money for a corporate, you are impacting, of course, the corporate itself and their supply chain. But when you finance, for example, 2,000, 3,000 growers or SMEs, the impact is quite huge. So I think this is something that will happen anytime. And also, usually ESG investors, they can invest in local currencies. So this helps a lot because we have many local deals that are in BRL. So this is something that will start to happen more and more. And even if we do have these large tickets, we can have local deals, and we don't need to have bonds or CRAs in dollars. Of course, we will do all those structures, but it's important to have a local funding or a structure that those foreign investors can invest directly in Brazil. I think it's a combination of factors. So Brazil getting more visual on what we are doing, the structures, how the impact is measured, how the diversified portfolios perform well, because as per the last 10 years, what we've been looking at those structures is that the more diversified, the better it performs. Usually it's not, of course, 100%, but we have done lots of structured deals. And when you talk about more than 100 debtors, they usually really perform well. So I think it's something that we need to educate foreign investors more and more on our local structures, the vehicles, the instruments. We have CRAs, we have CRIs, we have FIDICs, we have financial debentures. We have many instruments that are specific to Brazil, and we need them to understand the structure itself, the governance of the structure, because we do have quite a good governance, and investors are usually safe in those structures. So I think it's, again, investor education at the end.
Great. And I think on that, and going to the final part of this second round, you mentioned this education about investors and the different products. And I think in the end of his answer, Patrick, you're also mentioning the sustainable linked bonds and other structures that you think are trends for the future, and Brazilian players can play an important role in that. So you are the one closer to the market that is more developed than ours. Let us know a little bit of what you feel we're ready to do, or what is the next step on structures to make this, again, to make this market happen.
Right, sure. But let me just pick up on what Marta said. I think that's a really important point. Educating foreign investors on how to do business in Brazil. Still, I mean, Brazil is significantly more advanced than, certainly when I started in the market, 12, 13, 14 years ago. But it's still something of a strange place for lots of investors. Marta mentioned all of the elements of these transactions that's interesting for foreign investors to know. I would throw in there tax implications, because foreign investors come down here and, try and get their hands around the tax system in Brazil, good luck. Investor education, I totally agree with that. And, I think it's for folks like us on this call to speak more often, to exchange information more often. It's great for me on the international side to know about these CRAs that are out there. I know about the CRAs that Klabin does because they're a client, but not more widely about the CRAs that are issued in the market, and the green components of them, and the sustainable components of them. That's important for me to know on the international side, so I can transmit that to investors and companies that I come across in the international market. And likewise, it's important for me to communicate to you all what, on a more regular basis, what we're seeing overseas, because I think there's a lot more activity on both sides of the borders than what I know about and what you know about. Well, maybe you all know more about this specific area than I do, but I still think there's probably a lot of information exchange that needs to happen in English and Portuguese and so on. So maybe, we all need to take it on ourselves to give each other information in Portuguese, translate it to English, take English information and translate it to Portuguese, and then, kind of share it around to everybody. So I think that's a key point. But in terms of sustainability linked bonds, it's looking pretty good. I know of another company Brazilian company that is interested in making an issuance relatively soon, a sustainability linked bond. And like I said, Suzano has already done that. So that's going to be 2 Brazilian companies out of 5 in the world, which is great. And our firm did the 5th. No, I take that back. That would be 2 Brazilian issuances out of 6. And our firm just did one for Lafarge, who is, and that was the 5th sustainability linked bond. That's a big construction company. And so not Brazilian, obviously, but I think that's definitely some place to look, because again, there's the economic incentive. I think the expanding the investor base is a great idea, but that's really for companies that are already in the, that are kind of already in the international markets, and they want another extra element of their investor base to add to. I don't expect a lot of the smaller Brazilian companies or mid-sized companies who are interested in CRAs to immediately jump into the international markets. And then beyond that, add a sustainability component to that. I think financing needs that are financial needs are probably more important to a lot of these companies than expanding their investor base for right now. If we can just keep pumping out these deals in Brazil, the Brazilian deals, the CRAs that have these elements to them, and getting companies used to them, getting investors used to them, and then exchanging information between the domestic side and the international side, I think that's really what there is for the folks on this call to take it upon ourselves to do.
Thank you, Patrick. I think you mentioned a great point, right? I think we are the ones here with a lot of information, as you pointed out, and I think that what is even here congratulating the guys from BGS. I think this is one of the cool opportunities we have to really talk about it and learn, and even amongst ourselves, each of us is seeing different deals, different structures. When we exchange, we're helping the market here, right? We're really giving information, receiving information, and trying to build on that. And now, if I may, I think we got some questions from our from the guys watching. Eduardo Rossi sent us some questions. One, I'm going to start for this one because it's very interesting, and I know that Leisa has already looked at that, and even Milton and Marta have structured things similar. But Eduardo is asking about retailers, and he's asking if green bonds can be issued by retailers to finance their suppliers' green initiatives. So I'll open to all of you guys, whoever want to comment about this one. But we know that there are many structures involving retailers in Brazil. And the question here is how green they can or cannot become, and how we can bring these guys to the green bonds world.
Well, may start just a quick answer. We are struggling, and we are trying to develop the first cases for retailers. Of course, the customers of the retailers are the farmers. So we probably should use the agriculture taxonomy. The big challenge is going to be in a pulverized basis, which are the customer bases of the retailer, to create the set of criteria, the eligibility criteria that will allow us to get the certification actually of the deal as a green bond. So the use of proceeds should be such that the farmers that would be selected would have to meet those criteria. And we are still in the early stages of learning how to use the agriculture taxonomy for a pool of farmers. It's clear when you talk about one farmer and which are the set of best practices or what they should comply with. When you mix lots of farmers, we would have to have a common practices or a set of common best practices that would be eligible for the CRA and would meet the standards. So this is the challenge. I personally think that we will get there. Most of the retailers, they do have in their customer bases pockets of customers that would be meeting some of the criteria of the standard of the taxonomy, and I think we can get there. But it still is much more challenging than one specific farmer, which is very clear which are the best practices and the conditions of that farmer.
Thank you, Milton, for the explanation. Another question that we are getting here is, I'm gonna make 3 questions into one, but I think they relate mainly to costs. So we have these KPIs and these other rules that we need to follow either for green or for social bonds. And the question here is, are there any mechanics or financial incentives for people to follow the KPIs and to issue these types of bonds? And there is even a question about taxes, if there are any incentives for these green and social bonds. And so we're really looking at the numbers here, right? So what would be an incentive for a company, financially wise, taxes, or reduction of interest. Not sure if any of you guys would like to make any comments about this one.
I can take the financial incentives on the coupon. So the coupon is the interest rate that you pay on a bond. And the way the sustainability linked bonds work is that when you issue the bond, there is an interest rate that you've agreed to pay. However, after a certain period of time, if you do not meet certain what we call KPIs, which are metrics that measure your performance in a sustainable area, and what I think we've seen most frequently is carbon emissions. So if your carbon emissions are not kept within a certain level, then the interest rate that you pay will increase. And if you meet your metrics, the interest rate will stay the same. So that's the incentive. And there are a number of different metrics that you can use. What we're seeing on one of the products we're working on is a water usage based metric. But creative bankers and creative companies can come up with any number of metrics. Of course, sustainability linked bonds, like I said, there aren't so many in the market. And so those creative measures are still being developed. But it's literally directly a financial incentive built into the terms of the security. In terms of taxes, I'd have to defer to some of the Brazilian lawyers on the call.
Yeah. What I would say here, at least on the Brazilian perspective, we have some incentives for CRAs, for instance, for certain debt instrument, but they are not necessarily related to the fact of they are green or not. So green bonds can use the structures that we do have. We have some debentures that can be used for that. We have the CRAs, we have CRIs, which are actually real estate securitization. So there are some types of bonds with tax incentives that can qualify for green issuance or even social issuances, depending on how we structure them. So there are some taxes that we can use, but they're not directed to that. So maybe that's something that in the future we can discuss. I know there are many discussions now on ESG. As an example, the Brazilian major banks are now saying, hey, I'll be more ESG than ever. I'm gonna focus on that. And I think that trend can also, I don't think it's gonna be in the short term, but at least in medium and long term, that can impact interest rates also, because if investors, let's say the big international hedge funds, if they decide, hey, I'm investing 5% or 10% of my portfolio only in green, sustainable, social, sustainability linked, or these types of bonds that really inspire more, let's say, cooperation and a different view, not only financial, they have additional views. If people starting putting some money aside and say, I'm gonna direct this to that once, certainly in the medium or long term, I think companies will start benefiting from that, because we know that companies are still also adapting to that. Some of them already have that and do not know, as Marta mentioned, but many will have to develop. And the ones that reach there first will have a lot of funds available, and they might get some incentives. So I think it's really about maybe general education of issuers, of investors, of a lot of people involved. I think with that, we have cleared the questions we got from our attendees, which I thank you very much for joining us. So I'm not sure if you guys have any final questions. Isa, Milton, Marta, Patrick, if you have any final remark that you'd like to make before we we call this one off and wait for the next ones at BGS?
I think I'll just have an additional point, which is the blended finance. So we can start also helping the market develop and encourage new issuances using those kind of monies. So directed money, kind of more of a combination of public and private money. IFC, BID, local BNDES, and those development banks, they can be part of starting to push the market. And they don't need to fund 100%, but they can start leveraging their own money if we do this kind of blended finance structures. And I think it's something that will help a lot, pushing the market and going to the next steps within the time frame that private investors and institutional investors are starting to learn more about our market. So it's maybe a transition period that will help develop and do this education, because with new issuances, everyone get more educated in practical terms and not only in theoretical terms.
Definitely, just on that point of thinking of blended finance, and how you can get the incentives in different support. So I know that sometimes issuers worry in terms of the cost of certification and the cost of doing the other documents that you need to issue green bonds. So in Asia and some countries, like government have given support in terms of just the certification costs and covering a few of those. So of course I think you can use blended finance as well to cover a few of the costs that kind of scare first-time issuers in building this. And I think the main point is bringing all this education. And sometimes people say like, oh, it feels like it's so repetitive in terms of explaining what green bonds are and the market. But although as simple as it can sound, of course there are a lot of challenges, especially as Milton mentioned, when you start looking at the structures here in Brazil and dispersed bonds and how you bring this, of course, to small and medium producers, which of course is, I think, one of the main aims for next year, that there are further challenges. And just one last point also in terms of market development and how we see Brazil, we translated for the first time the agriculture criteria into Portuguese, or actually any sector criteria into Portuguese. And I think this is important just to highlight as something that how CBI is looking to the agriculture market, and that we do want to bring this information into local and domestic markets as well. And if anyone has any questions on the taxonomy, or because we did mention the taxonomy but not I didn't dive into detail, just drop us a line and we'll be more than happy to share information on that as well.
All right, guys, I think as we're running out of time here, I just once more wanted to thank all of you for joining. It's as I mentioned a few minutes before, it's great to have you guys here. Everything about this market, so learning from you and seeing you guys sharing all your knowledge and your experience, I think we are investing in this market when we do that, and hopefully this is a market that will only grow and will get stronger, and we'll see the results shortly. I think there's a long way that we still need to run, but I think we're doing that. We're already walking the pathway to get there. And even to our audience, I would make one question for you guys to think about when we leave, like when you make your new investments in the future, right? All of us have investments, and sometimes invest in bonds, investing in equity or other types of instruments. Would you consider when you decide to purchase a bond, if it is green, if it's social, if it's sustainability linked, or how much would that impact your decision, hearing all that you learned today? So I think that's something for all of us in the future think whenever making these investments, because we can make this impact on the other side also, starting to pick let's say the right ones. Not sure if right is the best word, but the right one, the right investments to make sure that the market develops together. Having said that, again, thank you very much, all of you, for participating, and the attendees. It was very good to be here with you guys today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rafael.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye, guys.
Emma, can you stop the live and the recording?